September 26, 1944. Over the gray skies of Western Germany, the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262, tears through the clouds like a silver lightning bolt. Its twin Junkers Jumo 004 engines scream with a sound no Allied pilot has ever heard before. Below, American bomber formations, B-17s and B-24s, lumber forward, unaware that the future of aerial warfare has just entered the battlefield. To the German pilots of Jagdgeschwader 7 or JG-7, this was their moment of redemption. Years of relentless Allied bombing had reduced their cities to rubble. But now, with the Me-262, they had something that could change everything. A fighter so fast, so advanced, that it made the rest of the world's aircraft look obsolete overnight. They called it the Schwalbe, the Swallow, and it flew at speeds the Allies could barely comprehend. In the first few engagements, the Me-262s slashed through bomber formations with impunity. They were nearly untouchable in level flight. German propaganda heralded them as Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapons that would turn the tide of war. Young Luftwaffe pilots boasted that no piston-engine aircraft could catch them. To many, the skies of Germany suddenly looked promising again. But across the Channel, the Allies were watching closely. Reconnaissance photographs revealed strange, swept-wing aircraft sitting on hidden airstrips. Reports from bomber crews spoke of jets that vanish into the clouds. And among the pilots of the U.S. 8th Air Force, curiosity quickly turned to determination. If the Germans wanted to flaunt their new machine, the Americans would find a way to hunt it down. That mission would fall to the P-51 Mustang pilots, the elite few who roamed deep over enemy territory, escorting bombers and seeking dogfights on their own terms. They were fast, fearless, and deeply bonded to their aircraft. Their Merlin engines purred at high altitude, and their range gave them freedom the Luftwaffe could only envy. But to bring down a jet? That was something else entirely. The Me-262 could outrun any propeller plane in the sky. The only hope was to catch it where it was weakest, during takeoff or landing, when its engines were slow to respond and its vulnerable belly was exposed. And so began one of the most dangerous hunts of the Second World War. Allied aces like Chuck Yeager, George Preddy, and Urban Drew would soon find themselves diving at blistering speeds toward airfields dotted across occupied Europe, gambling their lives on the slimmest chance to shoot down the world's first jet fighter. This is the story of how arrogance, technology, and timing collided in the final year of World War II, and how the men flying the legendary P-51 Mustangs proved that courage could outfly even the most advanced machine on Earth. By late 1944, the air war over Europe had reached a fever pitch. Every dawn brought waves of American bombers thundering toward the industrial heart of Germany, and every evening saw black smoke rise from cities that once symbolized the Reich's power. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Nazi Germany, was now a shadow of its former self. Its pilots were exhausted, its airfields bombed, and its fuel supplies dwindling. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, German engineers unveiled something extraordinary: the Messerschmitt Me 262. It was more than a new airplane. It was a leap into the future, the first operational jet fighter the world had ever seen. With a top speed of nearly 540 miles per hour, it could outfly anything the Allies possessed. Its sleek, shark-like design and roaring engines made it a symbol of what German technology could achieve even in defeat. To the Luftwaffe, it seemed like salvation, a weapon that could restore air superiority, scatter the bomber streams, and perhaps, just perhaps, change the outcome of the war. But while German pilots took pride in their new machines, the Allies were far from blind. Intelligence reports filtered in about strange aircraft being tested near Munich and Augsburg. Allied commanders knew the Me-262 represented a dangerous shift in aerial warfare. If Germany could produce enough of them, the skies over Europe would no longer belong to the Allies. The stage was set for a deadly contest. a clash not just of machines, but of philosophies. On one side, the futuristic jet that promised speed beyond imagination. On the other, the battle-tested P-51 Mustang, flown by men whose courage and instinct would prove that the heart of a pilot could still triumph over raw technology. The origins of the Me-262 trace back to a time long before it ever took flight in combat. In 1938, when the world was still teetering on the brink of war, German engineers at Messerschmitt began experimenting with jet propulsion, a revolutionary concept that promised unparalleled speed. Dr. Hans von Ohain, one of the pioneers of jet engine design, envisioned a new kind of aircraft that would no longer rely on the limitations of propellers. By 1942, his ideas had materialized into a prototype that would soon become the Me-262, a sleek, twin-engine fighter that could outpace any aircraft on Earth. However, innovation in Nazi Germany was never free of politics. Adolf Hitler, fascinated by offensive firepower, insisted that the Me-262 be developed as a fighter bomber, a blitz bomber capable of striking Allied ground forces. This decision delayed the program for months, even as Allied bombing intensified. The Luftwaffe's senior officers, including General Adolf Galland, were furious. They knew the jet's true value lay in air superiority, not ground attack. Galland would later recall bitterly, "It was a fighter from the first day, and it should have been used as one." By the time the first operational Me-262s entered service in mid-1944, it was already too late to change the war's outcome. Germany's once mighty air force was crumbling. Its pilots were undertrained, its factories were bombed daily, and aviation fuel was a luxury. Still, the Me-262 gave the Luftwaffe a glimpse of what might have been. Its incredible speed allowed it to swoop down on bomber formations, unleash devastating 30mm cannon fire, and then vanish before Allied escorts could react. The Allies were both stunned and alarmed. Bomber crews described the jet as a silver ghost that appeared and disappeared within seconds. Reports of entire formations torn apart by just a few jets began to circulate. Yet, despite the Me-262's potential, its weaknesses were clear. Its engines were temperamental and unreliable, often failing after just 25 flight hours. The takeoff and landing speeds were dangerously high, and the jet's acceleration lagged fatally behind its top-end performance. In the hands of a novice pilot, it was a death trap. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, the U.S. 8th Air Force was preparing its own answer. The North American P-51 Mustang had already earned a legendary reputation for range, speed, and agility. Its Packard-built Merlin engine, a licensed version of the British Rolls-Royce design, gave it performance unmatched among piston aircraft. The Mustang could escort bombers deep into Germany, dogfight with the best the Luftwaffe had, and return home on a single tank of fuel. For the men who flew it, the P-51 was more than a machine. It was a trusted companion, a symbol of freedom and resolve. The showdown between the Me-262 and the P-51 was inevitable. It would be a battle between the future and the present, between revolutionary technology and relentless human skill. And when they finally met in the skies, the outcome would surprise the world. November 1944. The skies over Western Europe had turned into an arena of desperation. The Luftwaffe's once vast formations were now reduced to scattered squadrons, struggling to survive each day. Allied bombers flew in relentless waves, escorted by hundreds of P-51 Mustangs, the long-range protectors that had made daylight bombing possible. Yet, for the first time in months, German pilots felt a spark of hope. Their new weapon, the Messerschmitt May 262 Schwalbe, had finally entered the fight. At Lechfeld Airfield near Augsburg, a group of young Luftwaffe pilots gathered beside their shimmering new jets. The Me-262 looked unlike anything they'd seen before. Sleek, fast, almost alien. Its twin UMO 004 engines promised speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, faster than any piston-engine aircraft could dream of. As the pilots strapped in, ground crews saluted them like heroes of a new age. The roar of the engines, high-pitched and otherworldly, echoed across the tarmac. Germany was betting its last hope on these men and their machines. Their first mission seemed like a miracle. Diving on an unsuspecting formation of B-17s, the Me-262s struck with devastating precision. Their 30mm Mk-108 cannons shredded bombers in seconds. Gunners could barely track the jets before they vanished back into the clouds. In just minutes, several flying fortresses were blazing wrecks. The surviving bomber crews were stunned. What had just hit them didn't behave like any aircraft they knew. Reports poured into Allied command. Enemy jets sighted, moving too fast to intercept. For a brief moment, it looked as if the balance of power in the skies might shift. German propaganda hailed the Me-262 as the Storm Bird, the weapon that would reverse the course of the war. Luftwaffe ace Walter Nowotny, one of the first to fly the jet in combat, became a symbol of that hope. But the euphoria didn't last long. On November 8, 1944, Nowotny's Me-262 was caught returning to base, its engines lagging in response. Allied fighters dove on him, firing bursts of .50 caliber rounds. His jet crashed near Ypres, killing him instantly. The legend of invincibility was shattered. The Allies learned quickly. The Me-262 was almost impossible to catch in level flight, but it was vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when its engines spooled up slowly. American pilots began circling above German airfields, waiting like hawks. The Luftwaffe called them airfield vultures. To the Mustang pilots it was deadly work. Attacking jets on the ground meant braving intense flak and anti-aircraft fire. But for the men of the 8th and 9th Air Forces, it became a grim necessity. One of the first successful ambushes came from Captain Urban L. Drew of the 361st Fighter Group. On October 7, 1944, while escorting bombers near Akmer Airfield, Drew spotted two Me-262s taking off. Without hesitation, he dove through flak bursts and lined up his P-51 Detroit Miss. His guns blazed. The first jet exploded in midair, and seconds later the second erupted in flames on the runway. Drew's daring attack made him one of the first Allied pilots to down multiple jets in a single mission. An extraordinary feat that earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross. Similar tales followed. Major John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group claimed an Me-262 over Germany by predicting its landing path. "You had to think like a hunter," Meyer recalled later. "You didn't chase them. You waited for them." The P-51 pilots began coordinating their attacks with precision. Some lured jets into pursuit, while others lay in ambush near known bases. Slowly, the aura of the Me-262 began to fade. It was no longer the untouchable phantom it had once seemed. Still, the jet remained formidable. When flown by experienced pilots like Adolf Galland or Georg Peter Eder, the Me-262 was a deadly opponent. In one engagement near Berlin, Eder single-handedly shot down 3 P-51s before his ammunition ran out. But such pilots were rare by 1945. The Luftwaffe's training program had collapsed under Allied bombardment, and many Me-262 pilots were barely experienced enough to handle the jet's temperamental engines. A single mistake, a throttle pushed too quickly, a landing flare mistimed, could destroy the aircraft. Meanwhile, Allied airfields buzzed with excitement and unease. The P-51 pilots were hunters now, tasked with taking down the most advanced aircraft in the world. Chuck Yeager, then a young ace with the 357th Fighter Group, would later describe his encounters with Me-262s as like chasing comets. But even he found their weakness. On November 6, 1944, Yeager spotted a lone Me-262 as it prepared to land near Bremen. Diving from altitude, he closed the gap while the jet was throttling down. He was fast, Yeager recalled, but not fast enough that day. His gunfire tore through the fuselage, sending the jet into the ground. Each kill was more than a victory. It was a message. The Allies were adapting, and even the most advanced weapon couldn't save a collapsing regime. By early 1945, the Me-262 was appearing in greater numbers, but fuel shortages, engine failures, and relentless Allied air attacks crippled its potential. For every jet that took off, 2 might be destroyed on the ground. Pilots complained of engines flaming out mid-air, of cracked turbines, of orders that made no tactical sense. Hitler's obsession with using the jet as a bomber further crippled its effectiveness, wasting precious sorties on futile ground attacks. As winter gave way to spring, the Luftwaffe's jet force, once the pride of German innovation, was reduced to desperation. On April 10, 1945, as the Allies advanced deep into Germany, Captain Robert "Bob" Foy of the 357th Fighter Group spotted an Me-262 near Munich. The German pilot, unaware of the danger, was climbing to intercept a bomber formation. Foy dove from above and opened fire, his tracers slashing across the sky. The jet erupted in a fireball. Another Me-262 gone. Another symbol of Germany's fading might extinguished in the clouds. In the end, despite its technological brilliance, the Me-262 came too late, in too few numbers, and under too much pressure. The P-51 Mustang, powered by courage, experience, and overwhelming numbers, dominated the skies. It wasn't the faster machine that won. It was the smarter, more disciplined pilot who seized every weakness and turned it into victory. The age of the jet had arrived, but the propeller-driven heroes of World War II had one last triumph to claim before the future truly took flight. By early 1945, the illusion of German air superiority had completely unraveled. The Me-262, once flaunted as the war's ultimate weapon, had become a desperate gamble. Allied air raids on fuel depots and airfields left many jets stranded on the ground. The Luftwaffe's elite units, JG-7 and JV-44, fought valiantly, but they were bleeding men and machines faster than Germany could replace them. What had begun as a symbol of technological supremacy was turning into a symbol of futility. The true turning point came in the spring of 1945, when Allied strategy finally neutralized the Me-262 threat. American intelligence had mapped out nearly every operational jet base across Germany, Lechfeld, Akmer, and Parchim among them. Instead of chasing the jets in the air, the Allies struck them where they lived. Daily raids pulverized runways and hangars, forcing the Me-262s to operate from improvised strips that lacked the long, smooth surfaces their fragile engines required. Without proper maintenance, the jets became as dangerous to their own pilots as to the enemy. But it wasn't just bombs that ended the Me-262's reign. It was the relentless adaptability of the P-51 pilots. By now, they had turned jet hunting into an art. Flight leaders developed new tactics. Top cover squadrons would orbit high above known airfields, while killer groups loitered just beyond flak range, ready to pounce. The moment an Me-262 came in for landing, they dove at breakneck speeds, striking before the German pilot could react. In April, Captain Edward "Buddy" Hayden's 55th Fighter Group executed one such ambush. As an Me-262 began its approach at Newburgh Airfield, Hayden led his formation down in a coordinated dive. Within seconds, the jet was ablaze, scattering debris across the runway. The attack was clinical, ruthless, and devastatingly effective. From that day onward, the Luftwaffe began abandoning its remaining airstrips, retreating further inland in chaos. For the Me-262, the dream was over. The machine that had promised Germany the future was now being hunted, dismantled, and destroyed piece by piece. The Allies had not only caught up, they had learned how to win against the impossible. The hunter had become the hunted. By May 1945, the jet age had arrived, but not for the Reich that created it. The war was all but over. Allied forces swept across Europe, capturing airfields littered with the wreckage of Me-262s. Some stood half-assembled in hangars, others lay shattered on runways, their engines charred and their cockpits abandoned in haste. What had once been the pride of German aviation now symbolized the futility of a regime collapsing under its own ambition. The Allies were astonished by what they found. Engineers and test pilots rushed to examine the captured jets, dismantling them piece by piece. American, British, and Soviet scientists alike recognized the Me-262 as a marvel of design, decades ahead of its time. Its swept wings, tricycle landing gear, and streamlined fuselage would influence the next generation of aircraft across the world. The U.S. even shipped several intact Me-262s back home, where test pilots studied them extensively. The lessons learned would directly shape early American jet fighters like the P-80 Shooting Star and later the F-86 Sabre. For the Luftwaffe, however, the cost had been catastrophic. Nearly $1,400 Me-262s were built, but fewer than 300 ever flew in combat. The rest were destroyed in air raids, lacked fuel, or were abandoned before they could fly. Pilots who had once boasted of their invincibility were now prisoners of war, their miracle weapon reduced to a historical footnote. And yet the legacy of the Me-262 endured. It proved that the future of air combat lay in jet propulsion, that speed and altitude would define the next era of flight. But it also proved something deeper, that technology alone could never guarantee victory. The courage, skill, and discipline of those who flew, whether in a jet or a Mustang, still decided who ruled the skies. The story of the Me-262 is not just one of innovation, it is a story of misplaced faith. Germany had created something extraordinary, a machine that could have redefined aerial warfare. Yet, arrogance, desperation, and political interference turned that innovation into tragedy. Hitler's obsession with offensive bombing missions forced the Me-262 away from its true purpose as a fighter. By the time it was finally unleashed in the role it was meant for, the war was already lost. The skies belonged to the Allies, and the jet could do little to change that. On the other side, the American P-51 Mustang pilots proved that determination could outmatch even the most advanced technology. They studied their enemy, adapted their tactics, and exploited every weakness. They didn't have jets, but they had experience, coordination, and an unbreakable will. In those final months of World War II, courage proved faster than innovation. There is a haunting symbolism in those final dogfights. The future meeting the present, technology clashing with human instinct. The Me-262 showed what was possible, the dawn of an age where speed would redefine combat. But it also reminded the world that war is never won by machines alone. It is won by the men who fly them, by those who think, who adapt, and who refuse to surrender even when facing the impossible. In the end, both aircraft became legends, one for what it achieved, and the other for what it could have been. The Me-262 may have been the first jet fighter, but it was the P-51 Mustang that ruled the skies when it mattered most. And together they marked the closing chapter of one era and the birth of another, the transition from propellers to the jet age. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, and with it, the thunder of the Me-262 faded into history. But its legacy, and that of the Mustang pilots who faced it, lives on. In those final months of World War II, the skies became a proving ground for the future, a place where courage met innovation and determined which would prevail. The Me-262 was the first glimpse of the jet age, a breathtaking machine decades ahead of its time. Yet, it was the P-51 Mustang, powered by human grit and tactical brilliance, that ensured freedom would win before the machines did. Today, the story of those duels echoes as a timeless reminder. Technology may change, but the spirit of those who fly, who dare, remains eternal. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for more untold chapters of history, where innovation, bravery, and destiny collide in the skies.